like Kirby said earlier, we're all super excited to have this new technology available at Burwash Equine, and I actually worked quite a bit with it in my internship at the University of Missouri. And that's where this Lameness Locator was developed, and my internship was 2009-2010, and that was right around the time when they were developing it and doing a lot of the research on it and starting to sell it to vet clinics across the world, really. And so now it is in use in quite a few practices. We are the 8th practice in Canada to get it, the 4th in Alberta. So it's out there, but it's not that common yet. But it's pretty exciting, and I'm going to tell you why. So I'm going to go through some of the research studies that have been done to prove both that it works and that we need it, and go through how you instrument the horse, the analysis that it gives you, the indications for using it, and then go through some case examples at the end. So in the University of Missouri in 2010, they did an inaugural study that, this was before the Lameness Locator, just looking at veterinarians watching horses for lameness. And they had 131 horses and between 2 and 5 vets looking at each horse with a whole bunch of experience, almost 19 years of a weighted average of experience. And when they watched those horses go in a straight line, their agreement on whether or not a particular limb was lame or not was only 77%. And that depended greatly on how lame the horse was. If the lameness grade was over 1.5 out of 5, which means that it was fairly consistent in different circumstances, then they had 93% agreement. But if the lameness grade was less than 1.5, meaning that it was quite intermittent, sometimes it was there, sometimes not, more of a mild lameness, the agreement between those vets was only 62%. So not really that good. When those vets had the opportunity to do a full lameness exam and then were asked whether the horse was lame or not, and then additionally to choose the worst limb, the limb that was most lame, they only agreed in 52% of cases. So, a lot of times what we think we know is not what we really know. So the conclusion of that study was that, especially for horses with mild lameness, the subjective evaluation of that lameness is not really that reliable. And so that is why an objective measure of lameness is really quite important. There's several ways that we can objectively measure lameness prior to this Lameness Locator coming out. One was a camera-based kinematic evaluation with the horse on a treadmill. That's what's shown in that picture there. You can see it, that they have a whole bunch of sensors all over that horse. Horse has to be on a treadmill, has to be all these cameras set up. It's quite a big deal. The other way is a stationary force plate, and that is a plate that's in the ground that every time a particular limb strikes that plate, it measures how much force the limb puts on that plate. Again, the horse has to be going at a particular speed every time it goes across the plate. The foot has to strike right in the middle of the plate. So it's quite a pain to get a really good trial with that. And so really neither of those techniques, they're good for research, but they're not good in a clinical exam setting. So we needed something that was more available in a clinical exam. So in comes this Lameness Locator. So the point of this technology is that, one, it indicates whether the horse is lame or not. It also indicates which limb or limbs are affected, the severity of the lameness, and the part of the motion cycle at which the pain is occurring. So is it when the limb impacts the ground? Is it mid-stance, or when the limb is pushing off of the ground? So we have 3 sensors. You guys will see that when we demonstrate it at the end here. One goes on the horse's head, one goes on the horse's pelvis, and one goes on the right front foot. And that goes wirelessly to a tablet computer. And so the one on the right front foot is really just showing which foot is on the ground at once. So it doesn't matter what limb the horse is lame on, you always goes on the right front, and the computer infers where the other feet are from that. The one on the head and the pelvis are accelerometers, and so they measure up and down movement. And this is similar to when we watch horses for lameness subjectively, because everyone thinks you look at the feet, but really I look at the feet quite briefly, just basically to tell which one is on the ground, and then I look up, I look at the horse's head, and I look at its pelvis, and that's how you tell the movement of the horse. So the lameness locator is mimicking that. And what it gives you is this graph. We'll go through this more intensely at the end, or further on in the presentation, but the forelimb is on the left and the hind limb is on the right. It gives you a graph and it gives you the numbers at the bottom. So the basic premise that it's following is that every time the horse takes a stride, if it steps on the right front, the head goes up and it goes down, and in the left front, the head goes up and it goes down. So every time, head up, head down, head up, head down, it should be the same in a sound horse, the amount that it goes up and down for each foot. So here is a normal horse. It's going to go up and down the same amount. In an impact lameness, where the horse's foot hurts when it steps down, it's not going to want to step down as hard on that foot, right? So it's not going to go down quite as far, and it's not going to go up quite as far. In a mid-stance lameness, it goes down not as far, but it still goes up the same amount. And in a push-off lameness, it goes down not quite as far, and then the horse really hurts when it pushes off. And so what it wants to do is throw its head up so that it doesn't have to work so hard to push off on that lame foot. So the head actually goes up more in a push-off lameness on the lame leg. And so the lameness locator is measuring the amount of difference between the top and the bottom of that graph. And so it's giving you a max diff number and a min diff number, a number between the maximum values and a number of the difference between the minimum values. So that gives you a forelimb graph, looks like this. So as you can see, the right front is at the top of the graph and the left front is at the bottom of the graph. And so wherever there more of those starburst patterns are going, that's where the asymmetry is and that's where the lameness is. So this here is indicating a right front impact lameness. I'll just blow up the numbers at the bottom so everybody can see them. There's a threshold on the forelimb of plus or minus 6, as it says on the left there. And so if the numbers are higher than 6, that's asymmetrical and that's indicating a lameness. So the number, the 28 and the 34 here, those are the mean values, and those are obviously way higher than 6, so we're indicating a lameness here. And the numbers on the right are the standard deviation, so that's just indicating if those numbers are smaller. For example, if the 13 is smaller than the 28, there's not a very big standard deviation, so it's stronger evidence that this is a real asymmetry. When we go to look at the hind limb, similar thing here should go on. When the horse takes a step with the right hind limb, pelvis should go up and down, same with the left, and it should be the same amount, the right hind limb to the left hind limb. So this is a fancy graphic, it's not mine, I stole it from the Lameness Locator people. But it should go up to a maximum height and down to a minimum height, the same amount on each leg. If we think about an impact lameness, again, when the horse hurts when it steps down on that leg, it's not going to sink down as far on that leg. So if the horse is lame on the right hind, the minimum position on the left hind is going to be lower than the minimum position on the right hind. It's going to go down less on the right hind, like we see there. Does that make sense? In a push-off lameness, the horse doesn't want to push off as much on that leg. So, and again, in a right hind push-off lameness, it's going to go all the way up on the left hind, and then on the right hind, it's not going to go up as far. Okay? So that's what the lameness locator is measuring, with those sensors going up and down with each stride. And the hind limb gives you this graph. So we have the left hind on the left side of the graph and the right hind on the right side of the graph. And if the little lines are in red and go up, it's looking for a push-off lameness, and if they're in green and go down, it's looking at an impact lameness. So this horse in this example is showing a right hind lameness. And again, if we look at the numbers, the hind limbs have a threshold of plus or minus 3. And so if the numbers, the 2 and the 10 are going to be higher than 3, the 10 is higher than 3, and so that's going to indicate an impact lameness, because the minimum difference, the difference when the pelvis is at the bottom, is higher than 3. We can also use this when the horse is lunging, but we have to look for certain patterns. So when the horse lunges in a circle, they're kind of often leaning to the inside, so there will be somewhat of an asymmetry there. So we can't look at those numbers in isolation. We have to lunge the horse to the left and then lunge the horse to the right and compare those numbers, and they should be equal and opposite. So if they're not, if there's something weird there going on, then we'll know that there's an asymmetry and a lameness. So for example, when we compare the hind limbs, on the left side here, the horse is lunging to the left, and we see that typical pattern of an impact asymmetry on the left hind, the inside foot, and a push-off asymmetry on the right hind, the outside foot. And then vice versa when you lunge the horse to the right. So one reason that it's really helpful to have this information is when a horse has multiple limbs involved in the lameness. That's something that's often hard to see with our eyes and hard to sort out what's the primary thing and what's not. There's several reasons a horse could be lame in multiple limbs. One is just that there's 2 sources of lameness. Another is that it's a secondary lameness in that the horse is lame on one limb and it's walking strange because of that, and so it's putting more strain on its other limbs, and so that it's becoming lame in other limbs as well. And actually the most common reason that we can see an asymmetry in multiple limbs is a compensatory lameness. So what that means is the horse is lame in one leg and it's moving, therefore, because of that lameness, in a way that it appears as if it's lame in another limb, although there's no actual pain in the other limbs, it just moves as if it looks like it is. And so that's what we have to sort out. As the second to last bullet point there is the most important, and that's the fact that if a horse has a primary hind limb lameness, it really often shows what looks like a forelimb lameness in the same side forelimb. And this makes sense if you think about how horses trot. If it's lame on the left hind and it's trotting with diagonal legs on the ground, if it's lame on the left hind, its right hind is on the ground. And it doesn't want to put weight on its left hind, so it throws its head forward on the right front. And so it looks as though it has a left front. So that's a little bit hard to wrap your head around, but it's really important for us vets to know, because you can have a really subtle hind limb lameness that you can barely see, or maybe you can't even see it. And it looks as though it has a front limb lameness. So you could spend a whole bunch of time doing what Alyssa was talking about, blocking it, flexing it, trying to sort out that front limb lameness, and it's never going to block out, because the real source of the pain is actually in the hind limb. So that's something the Lameness Locator can really help us with, because it can show us that really subtle hind limb lameness that you can't even barely see with your eyes, but it's consistent on the Lameness Locator, and we can know then that that's actually where the true lameness is. So how do we know if this works, this random piece of technology? There's been several studies that have been done to show that indeed it does. There's 2 studies here done in 2011 and 2012. The first one, they put the Lameness Locator on a horse and just trotted it twice in a row, and we have to make sure that it shows the same thing both times. And that study showed that it did. Its variation was between 14 and 17%, which is not quite as good as the force plate that I was talking about earlier, but it's good enough. It has a good enough repeatability that we can use it for clinical use. The second study looked at whether it classified the asymmetry as well as the force plate does, and it showed that it did in 83% of cases. So again, it's not quite as good as the force plate, but we're using it for clinical use, and it's good enough for that. One reason why it doesn't show it as perfectly as the force plate does is that if the horse has a bilateral lameness, it's lame in both front legs, then it's not going to show up as lame as it actually is, because it's lame on both sides. The next really interesting study that was done in 2012 in Missouri And this was done by one of my close friends, and so I got a chance to participate a little bit in this study when I was down in Missouri a couple of years ago. And they had these special horseshoes that they would put on the horse with screws that go into the horseshoe. And you would twist that screw to push into the horse's foot and cause it to be lame for the purpose of this study. And then you could just take the horseshoe off again and the horse is fine, right? So they had these horses with these shoes on, and in each horse they induced lameness in a different leg a total of 4 times. So they were able to have 60 episodes of lameness. And what they did is they had 3 vets looking at the horse, and they were blinded. They didn't know which shoe had the screw turned in, which leg the horse was lame in, and we also didn't know what the other vets were saying. So they gave you a little sheet of paper, and I got to participate in this part. Gave you a little sheet of paper, you watched the horse go, and you had to write down what leg you thought the horse was lame in, and you turned it in. And so they would keep trotting the horse. They would trot the horse, everybody would write down what leg they thought was lame, and then they would twist the screw one more twist, and then you repeat it. And they kept going, kept increasing the lameness until all the vets and the lameness locator all said the same leg. And so the results of this study was that the lameness locator selected the correct limb sooner, about 1/2 of a turn sooner than the consensus of the 3 veterinarians. They also selected it first in 58% of the trials, whereas the consensus of the 3 vets only selected it first in 8% of trials. So what this is saying is that the lameness locator is able to pick up a more subtle lameness than the vets can with their eyes. And the likely reason for this is that they're more sensitive. They have a higher sampling frequency compared to what we can sample with our eyes. They look quicker than we do. And so they are more sensitive, and that has been shown. And the final study I'm going to talk about was looking at horses with naturally occurring lameness rather than the previous study that we were inducing lameness. So here they just got 106 lame horses, and they watched them again with 3 vets that did complete lameness exams, and as well as having the sensors on them. And those vets were asked to classify the horses whether they were primary right limb lameness, primary left limb lameness, or equal right and left limb lamenesses. They had to put them in one of those 3 categories. So the vets agreed on that classification in only 59% of forelimb lamenesses and 55% of hindlimb lamenesses. So here's another study saying that yes, we do need some objective classification here. So in this study, the inertial sensors were positively and significantly correlated with the vet's opinions in all cases, but the agreement between the sensors and the vets was only fair to moderate for the forelimbs and slight to fair for the hind limbs. So when you first look at that statement, you might think, gee, the sensors aren't that good. But what it actually means is that we've proven that the sensors are good. Our eyes are not that good. So if this study had said there was really strong agreement, why would we need the lameness locator? It would be useless to us if it's a strong agreement with what we were already saying. So since it's only a moderate to fair agreement, it actually can add a lot to what we're seeing, and it can help us out a lot with our evaluation. So this is what Alyssa said at the beginning. It can augment our exam, but it can't replace our exam. We need to use both so that we can interpret what the sensors are saying and make a good diagnosis of the horse. So why should we use this? It's really good for subtle lamenesses, like I was saying. It's helpful for multiple limb lamenesses, sorting out whether there's a compensatory component to the lameness. It's really helpful for nerve blocks and joint blocks, in that if you have a very subtle lameness, oftentimes we aren't able to block that out because if it's intermittent to our eyes and we can barely see it, and then we do a nerve block, we're not 100% sure is the horse better or not. It's so subtle, it's really hard to do a nerve block in that case. Whereas if it's a subtle lameness that shows up consistently on the lameness locator, even if we can't see it that well, we can still do a nerve block and see if the horse has improved on the lameness locator. So it allows us to block out lamenesses that are more subtle than we would have been able to originally. It's also really great for rechecks. If we haven't seen that horse in 3 or 4 months and we bring that back, we can have those numbers to compare to, put the lameness locator on the horse again and say, yeah, you know, the horse is 60% better, or vice versa, no, the horse is not better, no matter how much we want it to be, because we can often introduce bias into that evaluation. We've treated that horse, we think, yeah, the horse is better, but here we have numbers saying, no, it's actually exactly the same. That all being said, we, since we've gotten it, have been putting it on all of our lameness exams, and I think it's really useful in that circumstance if we're able to put it on all our lamenesses, get a better idea of what's going on with all those lamenesses, be able to use it for the nerve blocks, be able to use it for the rechecks. It's been really helpful in a lot of circumstances. So I'm just going to go through a couple cases here so we can get some examples and better understand it. So this first case is a horse that has multiple problems in its right forelimb as well as its right hind limb. And the main problem we were watching here was the right forelimb. You can see that it has quite a strong right forelimb lameness. And we know from the imaging that we've done on this horse that it has problems in its coffin bone and its coffin joint as well as its fetlock in that right front limb. So if we look at the numbers, I'll just blow them up here a little so you can see them. On the left-hand side there, you can see with a threshold of 6, those numbers of 25 and 46 are significantly above threshold, so that's a fairly severe right forelimb lameness. So in this horse, we did a palmar digital and an abaxial sesamoid nerve block, so blocking out the foot, so the horse has no sensation to the foot of that right forelimb, and trotted him again. And so this is a comparison of those two. So on the left-hand side, we have the values before the nerve block, and the right-hand side, we have the values after the nerve block. And so just blowing up those numbers, you can see the numbers on the left, 25 and 46. After that nerve block, they came down to 4 and 21. So fairly significant improvement after the nerve block, and it actually gives you a number. It tells you there was a 69% improvement in that lameness after the nerve block. This was interesting because with our eyes watching the horse, it looked like the horse was better. It looked like we had abolished that lameness, but this evaluation showed us it's only 69% improved. So there's still something going on higher up, which totally makes sense because we knew that this horse had a fetlock problem as well. So we were able to go on and do a higher nerve block above the fetlock and take out that lameness as well and improve the horse 100% instead of the 69%, and make sure that we were getting all of the issues that that horse had. The second case I want to talk about was one I had a couple weeks ago, and I felt the lameness locator was really helpful for this case. So when I watched this horse trot for the first time, I thought he had a left forelimb lameness. That's what I saw with my eyes. And the lameness locator picked up on that left forelimb lameness as well, and it also picked up on a really subtle left hind limb lameness. So if we look at the numbers here, the forelimb numbers of 7 and 16, so fairly significantly above 6. And when we look at the hind limb, the number was 3.7, so just a little bit above the threshold of 3. And the explanation that it gives at the bottom says there's insufficient evidence to suggest which limb is primary and which is compensatory. But if you think about what I said earlier, generally if there's a right front and a right hind, the right hind is going to be the primary. So when I actually trotted this horse for the second time, so I wanted to just try it again and see if we could get some more information. After we've been trotting him around for a while, he looked a bit worse. And sure enough, that the hind limb lameness, the more we trotted him, it became more pronounced. Now you can see the right hind limb number goes up to 7.6. So it's becoming more significant the longer we trot him. And it really seemed like that was probably the main thing that we needed to focus on. And so I think that was really helpful in this circumstance, because if I just watched the horse trot once, I would have been like, yeah, it's the left front, here we go. We're going to focus on that. And I've been saying right hind limb, I meant left hind limb. I'm probably confusing everybody, I'm sorry. I knew I was going to do that in the lameness talk. It's really easy to just pick the wrong leg. Anyway, so the horse has a left front and a left hind. We're focusing on the left hind. So when I flex this horse's hind limb, the graph on the left is before I flex him, and the graph on the right is after I flex him. And so when I flexed his proximal hind limb, he got significantly worse after that flexion, and both the hind limb lameness and the forelimb lameness got worse when I flexed that hind limb. So that totally makes sense if the forelimb lameness is a result of the hind limb lameness. So just to show the numbers here, you can see the hind limb numbers went from 7 up to 18. So we are really increasing that lameness with that flexion. So then I went ahead and blocked the horse's lower distal hock joints because he flexed so positive to that upper hind limb flexion, and because of his use and signalment and age, we figured that hock arthritis was probably the most likely thing that he had going on. So we put local anesthetic directly into those hock joints and trotted him again. And again, the graph on the left is before the block, and the graph on the right is after the block. You can see visually in the hind limb that the red and the green are smaller. And when we look at the numbers, the hind limb is going from 7.6 to 4.3 there. And the forelimb numbers are also improving, going from 11 and 15 to 9 and 13. So blocking that hind limb improved the lameness by 71%. So that is probably good enough with a joint block to say that that is where this lameness is coming from, and so injected those hock joints, and that hopefully remains to be seen, because that was a pretty recent case, but hopefully will sort out the horse's problems. So I thought this was an interesting case because it really allowed us to focus on the hind limb a lot quicker than I would have originally. So, does anyone have any questions about the Lameness Locator itself? And we're going to go ahead and put it on chance here and give you guys a chance to look at it. Hopefully we can get it up on the screen here. But in the meantime, does anyone have any questions? Yeah, so she's asking how the sensors pick up on the way different horses are going. The way they place their feet and whether they put them out or in, that shouldn't affect it that much because it's all to do with the head and the pelvis. So if it's symmetrical, then it should be fine no matter how they put their feet. What will affect it is if their pelvis is slightly tilted, and as it is in some horses. And that's a good thing that we have to pick up on when we put the sensors on, and that will affect how we interpret the results as well. And sometimes you can just push up the sensor a little bit and make it flat, and that'll help that out. As well, if the horse is misbehaving and throwing its head around and being crazy, it should throw those results out. It only accepts results that are within 10% of the mean. So as long as the mean does not become the crazy behavior, then it should be okay. And so as well, you can trot the horse and turn it around and trot it back and turn it around and trot it, and it'll throw out the parts where you're turning it around. It only picks up the normal trotting strides. So. Yeah, so if we have a back lameness or a sacroiliac lameness or a lameness that's higher up, as long as it's causing one side to be worse than the other, it should pick it up. If it's totally symmetrical, then it's not going to show a lameness. It's going to show that it's the same. And so that's where it comes into it as well, your clinical exam, because if you watch the horse and you think, ooh, the horse doesn't look comfortable, it's not moving out, it's not striding out, you put the Lameness Locator on it and it looks symmetrical, then maybe we need to look at something higher up. And maybe the horse is painful to palpation through its back, maybe it's not bending as well as it should, so all of that needs to play into it. So yeah, if we think the horse looks uncomfortable and we put the Lameness Locator on and it looks perfectly symmetrical, that might give us some clues too that we might need to look higher up in the spine or something like that.